Hello, and welcome to Winchester Perspectives. I'm Tara Hughes.
And I'm Jennifer Hafley. Today we have three special guests joining us to talk about school enrollment, school funding, and the school budget in the context of the failed override and budgetary decisions at Springtown meeting.
We're also discussing some issues specific to Morocco Elementary, including the feasibility study required for a Morocco rebuild or renovation through the Massachusetts School Build Authority Program, or MSBA.
Our guests today are Frank Hackett, Timothy Matthews, and Stephanie Minyarji. Dr. Hackett is the superintendent of Winchester Public Schools and has served in that role for almost 5 years, including part of that time as an interim superintendent.
Timothy Matthews is the current chair of the school committee, and Stephanie Minyarji is the vice chair. Dr. Matthews has been on the school committee for just over 2 years, and Ms. Minyarji has been on for just over 1 year.
We also invited the Finance Committee to join us, but because of ongoing budget discussions, they declined.
Our conversation was recorded on Wednesday, April 29th, and a few things have changed since then. The second session of Springtown meeting was Thursday, April 30th, and town meeting voted unanimously to fund the Morocco feasibility study.
The Finance Committee also provided town meeting with its proposed budget, also known as the Yellow Sheet. It includes a proposed school budget of about $73.5 million, which we understand to be a 4.4% increase over last year.
For those wanting more detail on the school budget, you can find lots of information on the school website at www.winchesterps.org/budget. We also wanted to note that Dr. Hackett had to leave about midway through our discussion. And now here's our conversation with the superintendent and school committee representatives.
Okay. Welcome to Winchester Perspectives, and thank you for joining us today. We know this is a very busy time with Springtown meeting and ongoing budget discussions, and we appreciate you all taking the time to talk with us about what's happening with our schools and the school budget.
Thank you for having us today, and we're looking forward to the conversation we're going to have. Tim and I are school committee members. What we're going to be talking about is based on deliberations and public meetings, and anything that we express as an opinion are opinions of us as individual members, but as individuals we don't have authority. It is the body of the school committee that has authority.
Thanks so much for saying that, Stephanie. And so we always say that it's important to look primarily at the meetings and the votes of the school committee as the expression of its will as an elected body. So thanks for starting us off in that way.
We have lots to discuss, but let's start with enrollment. And maybe Dr. Hackett, you could answer this for us. What is the current enrollment in Winchester Public Schools, and can you provide a historical overview of enrollment trends?
And thank you for having us. I appreciate it. So we are declining enrollment overall. We are projecting right now an enrollment of total enrollment of 4,203, that is K through 12, which is down about almost 80 students. And what we're seeing is the grade levels that have been entering for the last few years have been lower numbers, and that next year, grade 6 going into McCall will feel for the first time a grade level that is quite a bit lower than what they've had before. Okay. So it's kind of starting to shift. The high school will be at the highest number of enrolled students next year that they've been since pre-COVID. So we're seeing a shift. We were around 4,400 or so pre-COVID. So we've lost, like many other school systems in the state, in the area, and in the country. We've lost about a couple hundred students overall. They don't all leave the same grade level at the same time. They don't all leave the same schools at the same time, which becomes a little bit of a challenge from a budget perspective.
If I may add, like you said, this is not just a Winchester concern. It's a Commonwealth and the nation's concern. Schools are seeing enrollment drops everywhere amongst our peer towns as well. And the incoming sixth graders, they're actually our COVID kindergartners. And so the entire nation saw a dip with that age group specifically, because there are many challenges, as you would imagine, and going into kindergarten during the COVID years. So there were some decisions that were made, and the grade just behind them is significantly higher, because there were parents that held their students back during that time. So there are swings between grade levels, but as we're entering the middle school, there are 70 fewer students than the current sixth grade for next year.
So Winchester is definitely, I would say, somewhere in the middle in the Commonwealth in terms of the enrollment decline that it's experienced. So we certainly have seen school systems that have a larger level of decline, and there are a few school systems. The one that I've looked into a bit is Arlington, and so what Arlington I think has done effectively is they've actually sort of created new housing stock, mostly multifamily, that still can accommodate a family, but it, also sort of allows them to bring more students into the school. And the upshot of that is Arlington's actually seen increased enrollment in their public schools.
Do you foresee any enrollment changes with our new housing developments that are coming on? And I know that the UMass Donahue study kind of included those new housing developments. Like, do you think we might see a similar bump to Arlington, or?
I think we will see a bump. I don't think it will probably be as large as Arlington's, because I think the textures of the housing that Winchester has in the pipeline are different. I definitely think we will see some net new students, but we have some data already, and maybe Dr. Hackett can talk about this a little bit, but we've had two larger apartment complexes come online. So I'll just let Dr. Hackett talk about that, actually.
No, I mean, I think what has certainly helped us, I think, with the natural attrition that we were having. We have had about 70 kids enter the school system when at the beginning of the opening of I think it was Riverside. So we did feel the impact of that, but in the overall, we're still trending downward. So it has been helpful. UMass Donahue, they actually did a couple of different projections based on, they kind of did a COVID adjusted projection. We're going to be declining less is essentially what they're showing. So they are projecting us at 4217 and 2930. So so I think the point is it's leveled.
Same ballpark.
It is same ballpark, which is good news. And I also think, part of it is Winchester is more immune to overall declines in birth rates and enrollment because people do move here for the school system, right? So part of our issue is whether or not there's housing available, right, and what the level of affordability of the housing is.
And housing doesn't usually sit in this town.
The way I like to talk about it is that we're kind of seeing the crest of the wave right now, the biggest part of that curve flowing into the Winchester High School population at the moment. Really what we're seeing in Winchester, which is why I wanted to place it in the middle of all communities in Massachusetts, is kind of a reversion to the norm as opposed to an absolute decline in the number of students. It would be sort of, we were at a certain level, then it peaked, and then it fell back to that similar level again.
And is that also a national trend that you see? Do you know?
I would say it's in this particular case, it's somewhat Winchester specific. Obviously there are sort of national factors and specifically Massachusetts factors at play, affordability, the jobs that have been lost over the past year, things like that. And so I think there's a significant Massachusetts component to it as well. But we are, I think, kind of bucking the trend a little bit. We have our own pattern, if that makes sense.
Okay. Could you tell us what are the maximum class sizes for each grade? Which schools currently have the lowest class size, and do you anticipate any redistricting going forward?
Okay, so let me start from the first question, I guess. So we have class size guidelines that the committee has adopted, and the range is a K2 range and a 3-5 range.
It's 18 to 20 for K to 2, and then it's 20 to 22 for 3 to 5.
And it's up to 30 for 6 to 12.
We definitely know that in the high school there are certain classes that are much more highly enrolled, and part of that is need in terms of actually academic requirements, and part of that is interest, right?
Right.
But the other thing is, and I think Dr. Hackett was going to say this, is there are also contractual guidelines in our collective bargaining agreements with the unions.
And do they differ from
They
those
do,
guys?
they do.
Very
And
much?
they only speak to a maximum number, so it is a little bit more. I think 24.5 at K2 and 26 or so at the 3 through 5 level.
So which number are you using now as you're kind of looking at classes?
They're
and
all
enrollment
guidelines, right?
Okay.
And the committee has been, ever since I've been here, and long before I've been here, really committed to making sure that we have reasonable, very favorable class sizes. But we will be well within, with the exception of 1 or 2 sections, we're going to be well within the school committee's guidelines for next year, even with the reductions.
And I think you had a multi-part question.
And maybe I can couch it in the situation in Morocco,
Yeah.
right, where there was the controversial plan to move kindergarten and first grade. That plan was reversed. But is that based on enrollment issues? Do you see any redistricting because of lower enrollment at certain schools? And I believe there's a plan starting now. Anyone who registers may not necessarily get into their neighborhood school, and how you would treat siblings in a situation like that. So lots of questions.
Maybe I will talk about Morocco. So Morocco, so my family, I have an incoming Morocco kindergartner in the fall, so my family was actually directly affected by what was going on. I think it's important to say that we originally had looked at both the class sizes for our incoming kindergartners next fall, as well as the students who are currently in kindergarten and are moving up into grade 1 at both Morocco and Lynch. And what we had seen is that in both cases, those kindergarten and grade 1 classrooms for next year were sort of under-optimized. So obviously, if you tip over a certain number of students who enroll, it then becomes necessary to add another section at a particular grade. And that can throw things into a sort of under-enrollment situation, right? Mm-hmm. Because obviously, if you have, the way I think about it is you think about 45 children enrolled for a certain grade at a certain school. You then have an option. You can either have 2 sections of 23 and 22, or you can have 3 sections of 15. And that's a really challenging, from a budget perspective, that's a really challenging situation for the district to be in. And so specific to the Morocco situation, I think there was a discussion about whether we could actually save a certain amount of money. It was probably up to $250,000 by putting those 2 schools, K and 1 classes for next year together. And we certainly had a lot of engagement from the community around that potential proposal. We decided to move away from that. And so there will still be some open seats at Lynch. It'll be sort of in an under-enrolled situation. And so we've made the decision right now for any new registrations, when there's a situation where a grade is about to sort of tip over into needing a new section, we're actually holding those to see how things pan out. And then we will have to make some difficult choices about sort of where students are assigned, where there are actually seats to be filled at a particular
Which
school.
is not a new practice for
Correct.
us. We've done it kind of, we had the same issue when Lynch was at Parkhurst, right? Incoming new students, we would put on a wait list and do the best we could to give the family the option. To your question about siblings, we always keep the families together.
Okay.
What we're concerned about is that if we have an influx of students coming into Lynch and Morocco kindergarten, for example, we could very well, it won't take a lot of students for us to be at a point where we might have to add another teacher. We're going to be so tight in this budget that kind of thing can really create issues for us.
Did you want to touch on redistricting?
Yeah,
I think the last time the town went through redistricting was about 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And there have been shifts in the population. And I believe that a lot of people come to Winchester, yes, for the schools, but the idea of neighborhood schools, specifically for elementary. And so redistricting, the lines are getting pretty stale, and we're seeing it with the enrollment numbers in our buildings. We need to make the numbers have to make sense. And we need to reconsider those lines, and I think that's an exercise. And again, this is not a discussion that the committee has had yet, but I believe that as a school committee member, that we have to have those conversations within the next year to really make our enrollment numbers work. And also, it's a matter of equity. If we have some buildings where there are classroom sizes of 15 and others are in 22 in kindergarten, that creates a different experience and different opportunities for our students.
And there's 2 more considerations as well, which is that obviously the buildings that we have are sized in a certain way, and those buildings also have some construction elements that may be coming to the end of their life. I think a lot about the modular classrooms at Ambrose and at Morocco, and obviously the district is going to have to make decisions on do we spend a 7-figure amount of money to replace those, right? And is there a way that we can do things without replacing those? The second point I'll actually make is around innovative approaches. So we've definitely seen in neighboring communities, Arlington is one in particular that's done this, where instead of sort of doing a full redistricting, they've moved to a buffer zone model, where if you live sort of along a line, You could, if you're sort of on one side or the other of the line that divides two elementary school neighborhoods, it leaves the district the option to actually move you to one school or the other based on the enrollment, the actual enrollment that's being experienced at any time. I think that's potentially more of a gentle way of at least starting this process, and it's something that I think the committee will look at very strongly.
So we'll move on to funding. We wanted you to discuss how enrollment does impact school funding.
So it's for us, the Chapter 70 funding formula, which is DESE. For us,
The Department of
of
Education.
Elementary and Secondary Education. We essentially, we're a low receiver. We're a minimum receiver. And the formula is based on several factors, not the least of which is property value and actual income within the community. So the state does not see us as needing a lot of funding, right? So we essentially every year get what they call a per pupil minimum. So it really truly is our enrollment count. So it lags 1 year. So we report our enrollment October 1, and that enrollment will become the basis for our Chapter 70 funding for next year. And that it will be a per pupil amount. So it truly is as simple as, like, if we're at 4,200 students, and it could be $35 per pupil. It could be, I know there's some energy around trying to raise that amount of money, but that's how it works.
So that's the only state funding that this district receives, what are
There's also circuit breaker funding, which is a reimbursement program for high costs, extraordinary costs around special education placements. That decision gets made every single year, and we don't know where that will go, and that has a huge impact on us. That funding formula is 75% of the cost beyond a set amount. Let's just say it's 50. I think it's 54,000 right now. So we owe the first 50, right? 54,000, and then everything above that is a 75% reimbursement rate.
Can you give an average of about how many students use that funding each year?
I can find it. Let me come back to it.
And then can you just discuss what are the different funding sources for the school budget or the education budget?
Outside of taxes,
Yeah.
our local taxes?
Yeah, I mean, I have kind of the breakdown. Is that like 95% of it?
Oh, it's the majority, yeah.
Majority of it comes from
yeah.
our property taxes
Yeah.
here in town.
Yeah.
Oftentimes people say, oh, Winchester, I'd love to have that money that they have in that town. Well, actually, we receive less from the town and less from federal programs because of our socioeconomic status.
Even when you have more of a cushion and more of a buffer from commercial taxation, it's still, the macro environment that we're dealing with in the federal situation as well as in Massachusetts are just really challenging right now.
How much federal funding?
We get Title I, we get IDEA funding, which is special education related.
And Title II?
Title II, there are a couple other titles, but I think it's around $1 million in total for total funding from feds.
And has that changed at all?
Slightly dropped, but not significantly.
So just to be clear, so IDEA is the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, which governs the special education. It governs many things, but in part the special education funding. We do have 2 Title I schools designated in Winchester. That's Lynch Elementary and Morocco Elementary, because of the proportion of students who are below the federally defined benchmark for low socioeconomic status.
And when you receive Title I funding, can they be used only for those 2 schools, or can they
Yes.
be spread across the
Only for
district?
those 2 schools.
Yes.
And you can't supplant federal funding for your staffing. It has to be in addition to the staffing that you already have.
Okay.
So in other words, it's not a full reimbursement for that extra position. So it will cost the town money out of the operating budget, but we do receive some federal reimbursement for that.
And it's also important to note that, like at the state level, when you're dealing with that federal funding, Winchester is also at the statutory minimum because of its overall high socioeconomic status as a community.
You guys have been working hard on your subcommittee to find additional revenue to actually help out with the budget crisis. Do you want to very quickly, hopefully, discuss some of those things that you've been looking at?
Yeah, so we've been spending some time to look at our peer towns and to see how we can update our fees, because a lot of them haven't been touched in a while. So to at least bring them up to speed with some of our peers, and also to help us in this current budgetary crunch. So we've been looking at transportation fees, nutrition fees, not for the first meal, that's free, it's for the second, and from what I'm told in the high school, the third and possibly fourth meal, and athletic fees, where sports are a big part of our culture here, and a big part of our override ask for the override budget was to help maintain the subsidies for those programs that come out of the operating budget. But unfortunately, in our current situation, we are no longer able to sustain that subsidy. So looking at fees as a way to maintain programs rather than cut them.
Our look at sports fees in particular is to cover a deficit that the committee has not allocated funding for in the budget that we are requesting from town meeting. And so there are sort of two options left to us in particular related to athletics. One of them is to reduce programs or offerings and the attendant staffing in those programs. The other one is to actually fund that deficit through fees. The district is still covering a substantial amount of extracurriculars in the operating budget, but in the override request, we were hoping to be able to hold fees at the level they've been at in the past. And now with the failure of the override, there is a deficit that needs to be covered and is not included in our operating budget request for FY27.
Okay, so let's get into that budget now. So I understand actually the discussions are ongoing as we're in Springtown meeting, but if you can tell us right now how much the school committee is requesting, and if you have a sense of what you expect the finance committee to recommend.
Well, at least at the time of the recording of this podcast, our number has not changed. So I'll let Dr. Hackett speak about the hard numbers, though.
So the current, at 5%, because that's how we do kind of have to talk about it, which was a number that came out of the State of the Town Committee. The year-over-year dollar increase is $3,527,86. That is a total budget of $73,936,504. That's budget to budget, so FY26 budget, approved budget to next year's projected budget. You know, we also have the human side of this. I've been meeting regularly with the union. The other piece of this, we got a lot of people who have been working for us who have been truly in a state of high anxiety for the last several weeks, and these people are in front of children. So we've done the best we could. They also now are kind of hanging on what's next, right? Because they understand the town meeting is the final say on the budget.
And although I feel like we've been talking about the budget for the last 8 months, because it started with the state of the town, and it was great because it was a collaborative effort where all the boards were sitting around and we're talking about these things and working out efficiencies. But once the override failed, that was a scenario that was a whiteboard exercise. And once we had to bring it into play, what we really needed to do was factor in feedback from the community. So from teachers and from parents, students even came and spoke to us. And that's the one thing right now that we're scrambling to integrate all of those thoughts to, you know, though we've been working and talking about the numbers, it's really just been on a spreadsheet. Correct. In this scenario. And now that it's impacting real lives, it's impacting our students, it's impacting our staff, that we wanted to bring that all together now because this is the reality that we have to live in until an override passes.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, the budget process is complicated enough because if you think about it, the school committee has to vote a budget by charter and send it to town manager by the end of January, right? That is a year and a half. I mean, we don't know really the amount of projections that we have to make and the changes that happen from the time that budget's voted at the end of January until June. Just in special education alone, in the current budget that we're in, we had to hire 7 additional staff members after this budget that we're sitting in right now, FY26, was approved at Springtown meeting, unbudgeted, unanticipated. So, and those staff members are going to be carried over into next year as well. So it's very difficult to do, and this has just made it much more complex.
So one of the complaints or concerns you hear a lot in the community is that there's not enough detail to the school budget. We
Right.
receive one number. Can you talk about how much detail you do provide, don't provide? Could you provide more? Where would people find it?
I understand the concern, and what I would say about this year is that we have been through so many scenarios with our budget. We always provide a detailed budget. It's not always as timely as what people would want it to be. And I already explained kind of why if we have to nail a budget down and we say this is what our budget is in January, I can absolutely guarantee by the time we get to Springtown meeting, it's going to be different. So we do the best we can to project in January what the number is going to be. But it doesn't always hold because there are just so many changes that happen. So this year, the line item detail has been much more complicated because we've made 32.5 reductions, right? So part of the detail in the budget shows the FTE count by school. We have an obligation, from my perspective, to our staff, to our teachers, to our kids, obviously, and to our parents. And parents are, I think, anxious as well. So we don't want to be wrong when we put it out.
I understand that, but couldn't you, I mean, maybe not like a school by school, but like, I've seen the budgets for other departments and it's personal services. You could provide a ballpark number of that.
But the audience that goes to, which is FinCom, right, they have questions. And as soon as we give them that, then they're locked in on that. And they'll have very specific questions about what's the year-over-year salary increases for these people, and how did they take health insurance, the people who are being reduced, and why is that reduction being made? So it's not enough for us to put out a line item that's not going to be accurate. We're 88% staffing, right? That's what we do. We're in the people business. So when you think about 12% of our budget is not staffing, and a huge portion of that are contracts that transportation, special education tuitions. There's really no discretion in our budget. So when we make reductions, it's staffing. And this has been Winchester's not been through a reduction like this for many, many years. It's a culture shock for people, I think, too. I think people were very surprised the override didn't pass. And so it's taken some time to work through all that. And I'm not going to release anything publicly until I've had a conversation with the union, until I've had a conversation with the individual people infected, until we've had conversations with the school committee. It's the school committee's budget. And I think, the statute in Massachusetts is that the school committee is in control of the budget. And what gets voted at the town meeting is the bottom line. So that's all the town meeting votes, right?
It is, but people would like, I'm just saying people would like more detail.
And I understand
And the budget
that.
book will be published.
Yeah.
When does that become available?
So it's coming out today.
Wednesday, April 29th.
Wednesday.
And it's
So
coming-
whenever
just be-
this goes
yeah.
out, it will, by the time this episode goes out, it will have been
Right.
released.
It's coming out at a 5% level budget, right? Things could change tonight.
It's a 5% increase from last year. We've already experienced significant unbudgeted, unplanned additions to the budget, particularly around a couple of areas, including special education, right? So the challenge is that our base budget, we discover new things during the course of the year when families move into the district, when the status of a special education student changes and the acuity of their needs goes up. Those services are very costly. So as an example, one out-of-district placement for a student that needs to be in a 24/7, 365 residential environment, which the district is legally obligated to pay for until age 22, can be up to $400,000 for an individual student. And so if a family who has the statutory right to that moves into Winchester from another community, the moment they move in, we take over the cost of that placement. And so in a couple of cases, since I've joined the committee in 2 and a bit years, we've actually had an unplanned move-in where a need of $200,000 to $400,000 is just immediately and statutorily added to our budget for 1 year.
For 1 year. And you're legally required.
And there's
And we're
zero
legally required
option.
to continue that service.
But there's no funding received from any other.
Well, we get the circuit breaker
In
funding
the circuit breaker
above
funding.
following
the
year.
following year, but in the
year.
meantime, we have to
Right.
foot the bill.
Right.
So I just want to make the point, because the 5%, that there's been a lot of discussion about, well, why is that 5% still necessitating the level of reductions that we're taking? And that's because we've had a 7-figure amount of unbudgeted, unanticipated cost added to our budget just in this current FY26 fiscal year.
And I can tell you, we have what we call a watch list. So students who we know are in the process, they might be going to residential, they might not, we don't know, but it's a possibility. We've got about $750,000 worth of those students right now. And if half of them go to residential placement. We're going to be beyond our budget. So, and to everyone's point, I mean, we have a statutory, ethical, legal obligation, and we should be doing that. That's absolutely what we should be doing. Beyond it being a driver on the budget and being a big percent, it is the most unpredictable part of our budget. And when you think about if the 700,000 I just mentioned, on January 30th, we're going to budget for every single one of those, right? Because we don't have enough information to know who might be going out. When we hit March, we have a lot more information, and that's part of the challenge of putting out a detailed budget. It just has not been a straightforward process for the last couple of years.
I think the challenge is that we do always do our very best to provide information on as detailed a level as possible, but I think that it never quite comes in time. The level of pressure that there is to get out actionable, detailed information is very much in tension with both the staffing level that we actually have because of our budget and our lower per pupil expenditure, and actually have chronically underfunded our administrative capacities. And that is a decision we make because the core, the student experience in the classroom is the most important thing. That's why Winchester succeeds, because we've asked folks in administration to just do way more than they would ever be asked to do in a more well-funded district.
Which will show up again in this 5% budget. I mean, the central office district personnel represents 30% of the entire reduction of the 3.5.
Right.
And we are 12, 15 out of 450 employees.
Right.
We do it because
Right.
we want to protect the classroom, because we have contractual obligations, and those all have to come first.
Is a lot of information available. It's just that folks don't necessarily know where it
that's a good
is, right? So one of the things I think about is the state of the town process and the just extraordinary amount of information. That is on a website called box.com. It's available through the town website and the state of the town page. It doesn't necessarily address the specific question you were asking about our line items, but certainly there's a tremendous amount of information there. We actually have a page on the Winchester Public Schools website.
Yes. And
No, I think what people want to just be able to go and see the bottom line, but see
Yep.
how you got to that
Yep.
bottom line.
Right.
You know, how
Right.
And I am not, I am certainly understand this is super late. So we're still been going through the reductions.
And I think that getting feedback has been important, right?
Yep.
That's why we held
Absolutely.
a public forum last night, and there was another one last week, and tonight.
2 weeks ago, yeah.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, yes, last week, spring break. And then also the tri-board meetings. Getting feedback from our local officials, as well as parents and, like I said, students, has been really important, because we have made shifts and adjustments to our
Right.
to the way at least I perceive our budget and where our priorities should lie based on that feedback.
But the reality is that the tension, I think, often in this town is around people who have education experience solely versus people who have finance experience solely.
Private.
Private finance or nonprofit finance or anything outside of a K-12 school environment, right? So, and I think sometimes it's the tension between people who know a tremendous amount of finance but don't necessarily have the domain-specific experience in K-12 education and how complex that is.
It's incredibly more complex. I mean, I come from a professional background where
Right.
one of my clients was a $3 trillion bank.
Right.
However, the human factor wasn't there.
Right.
Right. We didn't have to coordinate with 700 staff members and 4,300 students and a community of parents
And union contracts.
and union contracts. Yes, for certain, and a town meeting model. All of these add a layer of complexity. The complexities is because we have 88% of our budget are staff members. They're people that are unionized, and a smaller portion is non-unionized. But there are sensitivities and complexities there that don't exist in a more traditional business like a bank.
I think it may also be worth noting, and I think I have this correct for our listeners, that when we're talking, we talk about the 5% budget, the 3.8% budget. The difference, if I have it correct, is less than $900,000.
That's right.
Which is less than 1% of the entire town budget. The discussions are very fraught for
Right.
what percentage-wise is a small amount of money, but which means a great deal to all the different people.
Well, it's a
involved.
percentage-wise a small amount of money, but it's also, we've also made $3 million worth of reductions just to get to the 5%, right? So some of which we would have done anyway, right? But
That is a question.
But we-
1.2 million.
No question, but about 10 of the FTEs we would have done anyway because of enrollment shifts. No question. And I can show you, we've been making enrollment shift reductions for a long time, ever since I've been here. Getting to 3.8 it's going to be more productions, right? It's going to be, we're utilizing circuit breaker in ways that I'm not comfortable with. We're so lean, right? I can't cut more central office staff. There's nobody left. And we also need to there's a high expectation for education in this community. People don't want class sizes of 30.
No.
So we feel that pressure, and then we trying to make the additional reductions from this point forward. It's just going to be very difficult to do.
Because when we said people move here for the schools, they didn't move here for okay enough schools. They moved here for academic excellence. And we want to maintain that level of service to our students.
And I think looking forward to what potentially could happen in the absence of operating override funding in 12 months from now, we really are, academic excellence is at risk, in my opinion. The cuts that we would need to make to meet an FY28 budget in the absence of operating an additional infusion of operating funding would be absolutely catastrophic.
Well, I think the two of you termed this budget well. It's a bridge budget.
It's a bridge budget.
Right.
We really see it that way. It's a bridge to either a lot of reductions if we don't have an override, successful override, or it's a bridge to getting to a successful override. Because we're running on fumes if we don't have an override, successful override in FY20. It's just the reality of the situation. And, we have talked about per pupil expenditures and comparisons. It's important because the amount of money you spend per pupil is the amount of money you spend in your entire budget, right? So, and if you are spending thousands of dollars less per pupil, then there's a lot of stuff you're not doing. And so we run very lean. And people, not only do we hold ourselves to high expectations, we have a community that demands high expectations.
And, one of the biggest pieces of feedback we got from our family engagement process was that, at the middle school, my kid is in a study hall too frequently. At the high school,
Right.
my kid can't actually get into either the required class or the elective class that they need, the language that they actually want to study.
Want more AP courses, more challenging
why
courses.
don't you offer this AP course that their friend in another town has access to? Like, that was very much I would say it was probably one of the top 3 themes that came out of our parent and family survey, was just why can't we offer more things?
And tier 2 support.
Can you
that-
just briefly explain what Tier 2
I
is?
would love to. Tier 2 is students that need help achieving the standard but are not on IEPs or do not qualify for IEPs. So it's
Yes.
just
An individual
Yeah.
education plan, correct?
an individual education plan. And so to help students achieve the standard, and so that's considered Tier 2. Tier 1 are students that need minimal to no intervention to achieve the standard. Tier 3 are on individualized education plans and at times have identified learning disabilities. So they qualify to go on these additional supports. Right now, if you need support but you don't qualify for an IEP, the default is to hire a private tutor. And that just further accelerates inequities in our community. A lot of our peer towns, like Concord, they have a full Tier 2 program that has been proven to be successful. And we were hoping to do the same here. And that was the biggest part of our override ask. So I would anticipate the next time that we talk about an override, that is also going to be the first thing that we put forward.
I've heard some people say that would actually save the town
save-
money.
It would not be a dollar for dollar savings, and I think that's what's important, right? So because I think people think that we're not necessarily going to see a reduction in sped tuition costs, because sped tuition costs 1 year in the last 4 years went up 14%.
Right.
So, but it will help us to throttle back. We would not see the growth in the amount of students entering special education, because in the end we spend more money. Right, because we don't have Tier 2 services, because as Stephanie said, it's the only option. We
Right.
don't have any other way to support a student who is not meeting standard and who people have concerns about.
So from a fiscal standpoint, an IEP requires one-on-one assistance, whereas Tier 2 is a small group instruction. So it's a more scalable and more appropriate level of intervention for some students. It's targeted. So I look forward and I have faith that we are going to be able to do this. Maybe not while my children are elementary school, but we will do it for the next batch.
And it's elementary only?
So what we were focused on were for tier 2 supports for elementary, yes.
And it's just more complicated to offer tier 2 services at a middle school, high school level, because
Correct.
you don't have one teacher all day.
Right.
There's someone can go in service, right? Your kids are moving all over the place, so it's harder to do that. But we try to build in other supports. But we would love to be able to have the conversation of some additional supports for the secondary
And the
level.
teachers would love it too.
Yes, they would.
They would absolutely love those additional supports in the classroom.
The question I was going to turn to now is again on budget, but there's a difference between what the school committee is likely to put forward with the 5% and what FinCom is looking at the 3.8%. And one, it's only about 900,000 roughly. So I'd like to know what other funding options you could kind of, whether it's circuit breaker, which we wanted to bring up earlier, free cash, things like that. But also from FinCom that was the non-override budget that you were putting forward. I'd like you to address the difference between both and how we might come to an agreement with funding on.
Yeah, and that came up, I helped draft the memo that went to the town manager with our budget, the override budget, the no override budget, and our level services budget. And the very first line of our no override scenario in that same memo that got to the 3.8, the header was the assumption of $4 million in free cash use. That was the exercise. The exercise came out of the budget summit, and they said if the override should fail, we're willing to spend $4 million in free cash. What does that look like for the schools? At the time, it resulted in a 3.8% year-over-year growth in our budget, below the 5% that we were anticipating for level services.
But using $4 million of free cash, you're saying?
Correct. Right below that $4 million assumption, there was a line that said that at this level of 3.8%, we risk non-compliance with our union contracts and with our legal obligations to students. So at that funding level. Now, the override did fail. What did we do? Both on municipal and thank you select board and on the school side. We scrambled, keeping in mind the free cash use. How much free cash can we free up to provide more so we don't have to resort to a non-compliance budget? And our partners on the select board have been extremely helpful, and thank you to the town manager, Chris Senior, and also the FinCom chair, Derek Ross. Everyone was looking to free up every red cent to help out the schools so we don't run ourselves into that situation. And so I think that with the 5%, we are able to achieve it if we stay true to that $4 million in free cash. Right now, I believe their target for the structural free cash use is at about $3 million. So I'm looking forward to having that conversation this evening.
And might there be some financial implications if you're not in compliance with the legal obligations?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We will be subject to lawsuits, not just from the union, but also by parents because we're not able to provide the services that their students are required by law. Absolutely. There's also an ethical component to it. We won't be able to provide the services that we want to provide for students, but then there's also the legal implication that can result in litigation and fines and fees.
Looking at the override, and there have been many discussions about the number of, full-time equivalent positions that have been cut because of that. How many of those are actual people losing their jobs as opposed to being positions that are going unfilled?
Mm-hmm.
And how many would have been cut anyway because of declining enrollment?
There are 2 that are positions that are currently occupied. And there are about 12 that were enrollment-based adjustments that were going to be made anyway. And then the remaining are due to the budgetary crisis that we're in.
And how many is that?
So it is 18.
Can you tell us how many actual people, staff have
We'd
been
have
let
to
go?
we'd have to look that up. Anybody who has what's called non-professional status, which is anybody in their first 3 years of teaching, reductions that we will be experiencing will be from among the core of non-professional status teachers. And in many cases, they're sort of thrilled to be here and filled with energy for our students and for education, and that's just a heartbreaking thing.
Yeah.
It's also, to put an economic angle to it. I'm guessing those are also lower salaries that you're letting go, and is it contractually required then that you can't let go people with higher salaries or who might be closer to retirement?
That's exactly what we're dealing with, and that's part of why the budget numbers have been shifting, right? Because while we had somebody who was a more senior person who will now be bumping into that role, which actually means we're paying 40% more for that position than we were before because of the seniority. And
are you saying that cuts in positions may actually pay more in salaries?
On the whole, we will reduce. What you are correctly identifying is that in some cases we've had to make more reductions than we might have wanted because of the fact that there are differential salary impacts to each of the cuts. And of course, we didn't even talk about, the cost of unemployment. There are benefits for employees who are laid off, right? So we have to put those costs in. When we cut employees, there are costs to cutting those employees. It's not just that their salary and benefits go away. There are then costs that you have to pay moving forward. And so sometimes you just have costs that lead you to have to reduce even more staff in order to meet the bottom line budget number.
Just to finish up the budget discussion, I was just wondering how you see things moving forward.
We are here on Wednesday when this
April 29th.
is April 29th when this is released. Obviously, some of the things I'm going to talk about will have happened already. So tonight, the tri-board meeting between the select board, the school committee, and the finance committee is happening. I really hope that that's going to be an opportunity for us to all sit down and try to collaborate and find synergy and solutions, because I think we all do want to land this plane on a short and narrow runway. And so I really do think there is a solution to be found, and a real willingness on the part of the majority of all of the committees to sort of land the plane.
I think that's a really good question. We started off in a collaborative way. We need to end in a collaborative way, and I think
right.
that isn't just a good budget process. That's just good government.
Right.
Then moving on to Morocco. We can't really talk about schools and school budgets without discussing Morocco. If you could say one thing to the Morocco community, what would that be?
I have an incoming Morocco kindergartner, as I think I've already said 3 times. I also want to say that as school committee chair, I think it's my responsibility to put my family's needs last. And so, if there are hard decisions to be made around enrollment and distribution of students, I want to sign my family up to be the first one inconvenienced by those. We have a really challenging budget situation. And I think what I really want to say to the Morocco community is, to extend an apology for the communication lapses. It's certainly a product of how fast things have been moving, but it's never a good practice to have folks finding out things through the grapevine and not at the official table. And I think that's why Stephanie and I, wanted to start with talking that we're just 2 members of the school committee. The expressed will of the school committee happens as a group of 5 at the table. So I think the Morocco community needs to understand that the school committee is committed unanimously to rebuilding the Morocco building through the MSBA, the Massachusetts School Building Authority process. The 2007 master plan indicated that it believed that it was possible to rebuild Vincent Owen, Lynch, and Morocco for less than $100 million.
What is the estimate for Morocco?
I don't think we know yet, but
Right.
I think the ballpark figure that everybody has in their mind is roughly $100 million. And there's a real consideration whether the building itself will be a renovation addition as opposed to a full rebuild. And so we'll get into that as part of the feasibility process, which I'm sure we're going to talk about.
I think one thing that I would want to say to the Morocco community is that you have broad town support. And also I just love this fun fact about Morocco. Last year's MCAS, Morocco topped the charts, not just in Winchester, but in the Commonwealth. So go Wizards, who also are in the hearts and minds of the town, and they do support a new Morocco.
Speaking of the feasibility study, I love the message. Could you just briefly explain the different votes in the school committee and where things stand now as we're going into the second session of a Springtown meeting?
So I'm going to just quickly go back,
History,
which is the feasibility study is the sort of proof of concept from the town of Winchester to the MSBA that we have the wherewithal to fund the project. It's just the first step. I think best understood as just sort of an indication that we are interested in rebuilding Morocco. So I just want to set the stage that way. I would say that the school committee, the 3 votes, right? So the school committee now, I guess, has voted twice, has voted 5-0 to support continuing
yes,
in
yes,
the MSBA
yes,
process for the Morocco Elementary School.
Correct.
That it is, our best bet to go forward with the MSBA given the reimbursement rate that we would get from them for the project. So that's that vote, which happened
And that
twice.
reimbursement is tens of millions of dollars.
Correct. It is, right now it is approaching 35%
If it's
of
similar
the
to
total cost of the
Lynch, right.
project. So the committee first voted to place the Morocco feasibility study on the Springtown meeting warrant. Now,
That was a 5-0 vote.
that was, and keep in mind that actually happened just after
Just after.
the override. We'd been accepted into feasibility before the override vote, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we'd been accepted into feasibility. We knew what the 270-day window looked like, and so the committee chose to place that article on the warrant. Then, as the realities of the budget process around the override failure started to sink in, there was a conversation that happened about whether there was a possibility that moving forward quickly on a time frame immediately after the override failure would actually have the impact of essentially locking us into a Morocco that was not best Morocco that we knew we could build for Winchester. And I think there was a nervousness on the part of some members of the committee that would not lead us to a plan, an educational plan that was at the sort of high point of confidence in Winchester, right?
I'm going to bring you back to the votes, though.
But the votes, I think, are an expression of, I think, a fear on the part of certainly 3 members of the committee. And it did break down as a 3-2 vote, but I don't think it meant that the other 2 of us didn't have the fears that we would put forward a Morocco that isn't an expression of, the sort of highest point of Winchester, right? Because it could be that we economize in a way on Morocco that makes it smaller and less filled with resources than the other elementary schools in the district. And I think I'm trying to speak I was in the minority, but I'm trying to speak for those who are in the majority and say, I think they had a concern that this, what we put together for Morocco wouldn't be the best 50 to 100-year building.
To be honest, I still have those concerns.
Yeah.
I still have the concerns that are we making the best possible case for the new Morocco at this point in time? And I felt like if we waited until November, we'd be able to collect more data and have more public feedback to gather that information and make the best and strongest case for Morocco. And it's just so difficult to talk about educational programming when we're laying off teachers. And like we said, we're in this lull right now here in Winchester. And do we want to create an image of Morocco based on where we are today or where we could be and where we should be, really? And the concerns about enrollment, the concerns about, staffing, the concerns about securing a school budget that is providing academic excellence, those are still our concerns. Right. We need to make the case for a Morocco. And personally, and this is just the reason why I went from voting to delay until November and changing it to the spring. First off, the shovel-ready Morocco would have been the same. So I said maybe we should spend more time in making a stronger case and doing our homework. But it's also, we needed to make a gesture of support and solidarity with Morocco. Yeah, it has been decades and decades of delay. And at the very least, there can't be a bigger champion for a new Morocco than the school committee.
And I will say, on the flip side, right? So I was sitting in the same meeting where, over 100 people were there. The reason I voted the way I did is because, and frankly, we were all being called on to make a decision really quickly with some very late-breaking information, right? I sat in that room and I saw that level of engagement and the passion that the parents had. And what I saw was something that was actually going to be able, in my view, my own personal individual view, was going to be successful to carry us forward to a more aspirational place. And that's because of the engagement of the parents and families in the Morocco community who really showed up.
Can you speak to the timeline a little bit then of the whole process actually, and Does anything change with the vote in spring town meeting versus fall town meeting in that timeline?
Yeah, so there have been some questions about this. Superintendent's goal has been to move forward at the December meeting, the December 2026
Of the
meeting
MSBA.
of the MSBA. And when you go to present to them, you have to send in a packet. But my understanding is you have to send a packet to them a month in advance. And it's a pretty robust packet. But the idea is when you finally put together that packet, it then goes to the MSBA and then they consider whether to allow us to continue to the next stage in the process. So let me just really quickly run through what the stages are. So we are right now in the first of 9 modules, which is the eligibility period. We've been invited by MSBA, which is great because we've beaten out other communities in the Commonwealth. That's where we are, right? The feasibility study is part of module 1 of 9. We are literally the first step on this road, which is going to take us from now until 2030 or 2031 if everything goes according to plan. Feasibility study, I would say, in the eligibility period is kind of the most crucial factor in the sense that it is the town's expression of a positive will to move the project forward, right? So I think the most important headline here is we're still in module 1, and approving the feasibility study is only the thing that allows us to it's that precondition to get to module 3, which is the feasibility period.
A quick follow-up on that. So it's $1.5 million you're asking town meeting for
roughly. I mean, the number is
roughly
more specific.
$1.5 million.
And it needs a 2/3 vote because it's borrowing.
Is a borrowing authorization up to that amount of money.
Okay.
And so my understanding from reviewing other projects is it regularly comes in under that amount of money. And also it's important to note, as long as we progress along, that money comes back, it is reimbursable to the town once the project progresses.
Okay. What I was trying to get at is it's a tight budget situation for the whole town. If for some reason it did not pass at spring town meeting, do you have the option to bring it back to fall town meeting?
We do, and we would intend to do that because the reality is that we need an affirmative vote of town meeting on the feasibility study to continue partnering with the MSBA.
Could it affect our situation with the MSBA to have a failed vote on it at spring town meeting?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that...
I don't know. I think that's difficult to say.
Yeah.
Because we also have a failed override.
Correct.
And I think that the reason why, and what was told to us, is that the reason why MSBA was so quick to partner with us again after Lynch is because of our track record of broad town support for such projects.
Can you explain the preschool element
was one
in
of mine.
Morocco that seemed to be a surprise to kind of everyone in town and where that stands now?
We heard from the MSBA process was that there is a desire to look at whether having a neighborhood pre-K program, so it's just the 4-year-old pre-K year, in the building, which that can potentially be money savers and also help kids achieve better, right, over a period of time. So what I'm saying is that we are examining whether adding that to Morocco from a space planning perspective is something we want to consider, and also whether the town would want to commit to and commit to funding that kind of a program, specifically at Morocco.
Not
and I want
universal.
to be very clear about that. And so, from a financial perspective, it's a 6-figure amount of money, right? It's really maybe up to $250,000. Obviously not something that we would be doing right now in our current budget situation. But I want folks to understand that because it's not universal pre-K across the entire district, it has a fairly limited economic or tax impact. And some of that is reimbursable through the state. But I think, sort of thinking about Morocco more broadly in the community, I see it as one lever around enrollment. It sort of gives folks a reason to prioritize that community.
I wonder if you would like to speak to rumors that Morocco could be closed.
So Morocco is definitely not going to be closed. We have looked at the enrollment, and there is no way we can currently educate the number of elementary students that we have in Winchester without the Morocco Elementary School. It's actually one of the more densely populated and central neighborhoods in town, and there's no obvious school that sort of absorbs those students.
Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
As noted at the top of the show, Spring Town Meeting is underway. The first 2 sessions were held Monday, April 27th and Thursday, April 30th. The next session is Monday, May 4th. Budget discussions can't start until May, and debate on the town and school budgets is expected on Thursday, May 7th.
All sessions of town meeting begin at 7 p.m. at the high school. Town meeting is always open to the public and is broadcast live and on demand on WinCam.
And that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach us at winchesterbeat01890@gmail.com.
You've been listening to Winchester Perspectives. Find us on Apple, Spotify, WinCam, and YouTube.